15% organic matter for me and my soil. And my pH pretty much stays the same between 6.4 and 6.9. It don't really change anymore. They probably be stuck there like from there, like I like the grass, so I start all my grass around March the 4th. I usually try to be in the ground around the third week of April, and pretty much what I found out that almost every big melon in North Carolina it's always been set before June 10th. After June 10th, there's never been one grown after 300 pounds. It's dramatically fell down to the 260s to the 250s. So there is something really into when you set fruit. Most of the big ones have been set between the end of May to about the first week of June.
What's your soil temperature looking like when you're trying to set that field?
So my soil consists of about 78. That's about the average.
And what kind of depth are you measuring at? 6
inches. Yeah. Everything is covered. Weeks fabric and pine straw. No
What's
bare
your soil
ground.
now? Do you know what your soil is now?
Right this minute, what
Yeah.
you want? For
Yeah.
the bed I got heated or the bed that's not heated?
Non-heated.
It's about 56.
56.
Yeah. So I got one plant that's growing right now. I actually got it jacked up to about 90 because it raises the heat up. I got a little hoop house and it heats it about 60 degrees at night in there.
Are you covered on that plant right now as well? From the greenhouse?
I'll be covered, yeah, until probably maybe 2 more weeks, and then I'll either be forced to build a bigger one or to just let it fend for itself. Yeah. Another really probably big thing about melons, and Chris taught me this the year when I started growing it. When after you set a fruit between stage 12 and 14, if your melon don't start growing about 5 pounds a day, it's never going to reach the potential what any other melon is. Like it really has to hit that, or you need to cut it and go with a different one. The distance you really want it to be is between about 7 and 10 feet, and that almost works for any vine from your main to your fingers to a secondary off the main. Other than that, Chris is probably the longest one out to grow a world record at 14 feet out of the main. Other than that, most of them are grown within 10 feet and under. I fertilize heavy. I never quit. My soil's jacked up. For any of y'all have seen my test, I put them out on a lot of stuff. Even at as high as my soil is, there's a day in between after you pollinate, and it's between varieties 3 and 5. I don't care how high you are in calcium, you will literally go deficient in about that 3-day window. 2019, when I had my best year, I had an early plant, and I tested and tissue tested that plant just to stay ahead of all my rest. And when I saw how big a change that was, I did all my plants different and started feeding according to how my early plant was. I stayed ahead of all my others. And that taught me that boron and calcium, you never need to stop. As soon as you do, you're done. You'll never get it back up. You'll never be sufficient. When you're behind, you're behind.
All those were foliars?
Yes.
And how?
I only root drench about twice a week, and that's very minimal. So those that have like a ppm meter, I never go over 400. My foliar sprays, they're sky high. I wouldn't even want to tell you. Like they don't even read on a meter because they go off the top. I add a lot of stuff. I'm not afraid about it. It is really hard to burn. You get more burning from a melon by the heat from the ground than you will by spraying it. I feed every day. I feed about 6:30 to 7, long enough, and every evening to let my plants dry off. I only water about 25 gallons every 2 days, sometimes 30 gallons. If it's a dry period, I will turn sprinklers on for anywhere from 6 to 7 hours to try to get a good deep water, and then I go back in between and just drip feed in between.
Do you have any type of moisture sensors? Do you know what your water looks like? You have one?
Just my finger.
Yeah, I've got one.
You want to be on the dry side. I can say most melons that are kind of in dry season, more melons go heavier to chart than in wet. Why is that? I don't know. I don't know if they store more water. That's just the natural of the fruit. But I've also had it where one fruit will go 10% heavy, and this one over here is 1% light, and they're literally growing 10 feet from each other. I grow all my fruit in raised beds. They're all 12 by 16. I literally go out from the crown of my stump, and I mark my plants 7 feet here, 7 feet here. I take nothing before. I stay between 7 and 10 feet, or I forget it. I have set out at 11 because it's right on the verge of where I would go. Except for Maine, I would go a little farther. Chris has had a lot of luck in that 12 to 14. A lot of the people that I know, and I made a chart, anybody can come look at it, take pictures. 6 to 9 feet is really, really big for a melon. Some of them do it, some of them don't. If you're growing grass, the one big thing I can tell you is if you're doing over 8 pounds, I feel sorry for you. It will end catastrophic. It will not go to the end. I've had them get as high as 11 pounds a day, and it's not fun. It's fun to watch, but it'll never make it, never. You want to stay in that 6, low 7. My 306 did about 10 days in that 7 pound range, but it ended up getting some kind of disease. I actually got white flies on it too, really bad. I'm not as shy. I know some people say you shouldn't use fungicides. I've only ever seen one fungicide have a negative effect on a melon. That was Valathon. Me and Chris, did you use it? And Todd, I know Todd used it. It was all on scales. Anytime you sprayed it, you was negative 0.6 of a pound from where you was. If you was doing 5 pounds a day, you would be 4.4 the next day. And no matter when you sprayed it, that's how it was. Any other fungicide, I've never seen a negative effect.
Did it kick back up after a couple of days, or?
Very next day, though.
Okay.
It's just a 1 day deal. The only one that had a positive effect was Rime. Every time you use Rime, it'll go up about 0.6 for 2 or 3 days. Why is that? I don't know, but that's it's one of the better ones now I know for gummy stem blight. That's why I was using Valathon, because it was really good for gummy stem. I go through probably about 12 different fungicides. Some of them, if I got something bad, I might mix 3 or 4 of them together. I've never had a bad, I guess, mix with it, other than a pumpkin. I've sprayed on the pumpkin and burned the hell out of those leaves. But for melons, they can take a lot more than what you think. Eat a lot more than a pumpkin probably ever dreamed of, except for water. They can't take it like they could. What's another good? Anybody got any other questions on mine?
Share with them about the fruit set. I found that interesting.
Which one?
About the first 10 days for 14
So,
days. So
melons pretty much stop dividing cells after day 14, or inside of a fruit. There's 2 different cells, so you got the cells that make up the flesh and cells that make up the rind. After day 14, that melon is programmed, it will never grow no more flesh than it will right then. Even though that melon's only this big, it just elongates after that fact. So, people want a solid melon, which is good, but you're never going to get a big solid melon, because what happens is your rind continues to grow, pulls your flesh apart after it's ripe. It's done. So then you ain't doing nothing but growing rind. So you need potassium, but you should stay away from spraying anything big on potassium until after day 14, because potassium will knock you out of cell division a lot earlier than your minimum the size of your fruit.
Is that also true for pumpkins?
I do not know that. I know it's a lot longer. What, you like 20 days for cell division after melon? So that's another 6 days. I know calcium, sugar remover, some of the people that's getting that today is really big. Boron. Like, you want to be really, I've actually tried to go toxic in it to try to see how high I could get. It's really hard to do that with calcium because they don't go in the plant really easy. But I stay on the higher side. I never stop. Calcium is almost an everyday thing. I still have lighter fruit to chart than what some people do in here, but I end up growing a big shell that ends up weighing pretty decent. I'm trying to think of the next thing to think of.
You ever try Florel on it?
I know some that has and had very bad years.
Right.
I won't say that it's not a bad thing. They got something else that's called Excita, which is a foliar cytokine that's supposed to help with cell division and maintain Last year was the first year I did it, and I'll say it works extremely well with keeping your plant very aggressive to the end. I would not use it to the extent because I already have very aggressive plants with how I guess everything is set up, so they grow like crazy. I don't want to prune 3 or 4 times a week. I just don't.
Right.
And that's another thing with how I grow, like I grow grass. I have to prune after about day 30. If I do it, let's say day 15, my numbers go too high, I blow up all my stumps very bad. If I start doing it around day 30, I seem to keep longer, higher gains than some people do for longer on its lifespan. A melon will grow anywhere from 90 to 130. I know one guy grew one for about 150 days, that was still growing. That was next, at 0.2 pounds, even at the end, it was still growing. My 330 was 129 days old, and it was still doing 0.6 pounds a day. So it never got so good. The 341 I grew, it was still growing.
Andrew, are you still having good vegetative cycle at that stage? Are you still growing plants?
It all depends on how healthy your plant is. So I set on smaller plants, literally when this vine's out 8 feet and there's a melon, I might have 6 vines on my whole plant, a couple little scrubbly vines. I'm setting her fruit. That fruit's big enough, that plant's almost big enough right then to push it. You got another 10 days after you set that to really grow your plant out, but I'm only growing in probably 75 square feet when my plant is set, and it may take from there to end of July, 1st of August to finish filling in the spot, if that melon's pulling hard enough.
Which is
If
about
it
200 squares?
Yes, I'm 176 to 196 my biggest beds. When you get a really good melon, it will pull so hard, it'll pretty much shut your plant down. And it takes forever to grow it. Some of the ones that grow pretty average, that 4 to half to 5, your plant still grows pretty good. I mean, and you can feed it more. If I'm already feeding mine enough, but it's more towards fruit than it is through nitrogen. Like, I'm pretty much done with that after I got what I need. Just a little here and there.
How much plant you have beyond your melons? You say you're setting at 7 to 10 foot.
So, like most of my melons, I deadhead after. It depends on what vine I'm on. Everything's gonna get deadheaded at some time. Now, you can deadhead everything you want to and pull your plant, and there's like one vine's like 40 feet long. You're like, how in the heck did you ever get that long? Because it's snaking. But everything gets cut. So after about day 30, I literally go in there, I tape a razor knife to the end of a stick, and I just start knocking off every head of everything. By day probably 35, 40, I'm down to about 10 growing tips, and I pretty much try to keep that to the end. Unless I need to grow more plant back. But now, like using Excita, you can probably go all the way down to nothing and use it, because it really stimulates your plant to want to grow. I mean, it really does. So if you need to grow some leaves back, for some reason, I would use that under any circumstance.
And that's, sugar remover's the same thing.
Yeah, it has it in there, yeah. It does. One is just full strength, while one is diluted.
Which product was that?
Excita. Yeah. And so as far as like fertilizer, I use pretty much everything under the sun. That's anybody in the house, but my major ones are like Hawaiian Big Bud, Urea Mate, and then I use one called Incredible Bulk, and then between that I use Cal Mag a lot. I use a little TKO, kelp's in everything, humic acids in everything.
U-Plus?
I do that with tea about twice a week. And that stuff smells so good. Do what?
You do tea?
Yes, at least twice a week. And Tay, I was talking to Tay, and he got a lot of amino acids. Some of the stuff I didn't even know he had in it, they would really be, like I understand more why it's so better, because he was more like, why are you worried more about the fertilizer you put on except for what's in your ground that can break it down and make it more available. So using amino acids is really good. And I use like 3 different types, and that's the Emerald Goddess is one of them, Tay's another one, and Essentials is another. And then I use a couple that's not labeled. Actually fish powder has a lot in it that what you need. Any fish really. And then there's a couple that I use that's actually food grade. One's called glycemic, and the other one I don't know, but they are very high in helping transport calcium around in your fruit. There's a lot of things that's not labeled as fertilizers that can use, because they're all the same. And when I talked to this one manufacturer, pretty much all fertilizers are the same. It's just what they put in it that they don't tell you is what makes them different. What hormones they put in it, what cytokinin, or what kind of auxin, or whatever they put in it, and how they do it, that they don't have to label it on their stuff is what makes them a little different from each
Or
other.
what charge they have on it,
Well treated, yes.
because, you know,
Negative or positive.
you buy fertilizers that have the wrong, electron on them, and they're just not available to the plant.
Yep.
And that's where your bugs come into play.
And if any of y'all was growing on a rack still, I would strongly get away from that. Like a hammock, you know, like growing in a hammock, I would not grow on a rack. I would not put my fruit on sand, because it still has a part of rot. And I know up there, y'all a little different. Y'all not as high, you probably don't have as much as biology running in the soil like we do, maybe. That we got bad, more worse type down here. But I would definitely grow it to where in a hammock of some sort where you can get airflow all the way around. It sucks to go weigh a melon and you roll it over and it's like, yeah, that's not gonna make
You
it.
say, do not grow on a unit?
On a rack,
Right.
a rack the whole way.
Oh,
Chris still has
the
really
wire
good look at
racks.
it. Yeah, the wire rack or the
Okay.
plastic shelf racks, whatever. If you don't know how to make a hammock, I got pictures. I'll send you. Frank Mudd does, Nick McCassin has them, he can tell you how to make them. They use some different materials. I switched over to using shade cloth, it's a little cheaper. It actually lasts a little longer. You get about 2 years out of the minnow net, and then you can take and push your hand right through it.
I started using window screen.
Yeah, you did the pet type, right? That's a little more stronger than the average
It's
one.
it's a heavy duty heavy duty screen. You can get the big rolls at Lowe's and stuff, and it, so far, it seems to work real good.
Mhm.
Andrew, can you tell us about your watering system?
Mine's just totes with pump, and then I do PVC. My lines are, I got 7 lines in a bed. The bed's 16 foot long, so they're about 20 inches apart. This year I'm gonna do an A and a B, because I'm not gonna overhead water as much, so I'll have them at every 10 inches, but one will get water one day, one will get water the next time. Try to be more even across the board. But I find it's more better to keep your stuff on the drier side, because when you get too much, you do not, if you're measuring, you're going over 6 pounds a day, stop what you're doing. Just try to maintain that. Maybe you need to feed every 3 days. Maybe you need to go every 2. Maybe you need to prune a little plant back. Maybe you need a little bit more growth. You know, there's a fine line with trying to stay in that line and just doing that. And it just takes a couple of years to actually learn it. But still that, I do a 275 gallon tote, and that's, it pretty much switched between 10, sometimes 12 plants. Sometimes they get a little more, sometimes they get a little less. I only water at night, I don't never do it in the morning. I've had way better luck in the evening than versus when I used to water in the morning. Biggest I got was 256, I don't know if it's just superstitions for me, but all my big ones came from more watering in the evening. I have seen when it's too wet and you go water your plant, that a melon will start losing weight right away, which is really weird. But I've never seen that when it's dry and you water. But like when North Carolina went through its 2 wettest years on record, I was trying to grow and you would go water, it just piss you off. You start watering your plant, it's like, oh, why is it losing weight? You know, so scale can either be really helpful or it can be really aggravating, because you actually know kind of where you're at.
It's 2019, right?
2018.
2018.
2018 and 2020 was the 2 wettest years on record.
What time in the evening do you usually run your water?
So I'm probably home playing with my plants at 4:30, and then I'm probably starting to water around 6:30.
So
And
you
it
don't
only-
water by sunset?
Well, I'm done. It takes me about 20 to 25 minutes to water my whole bag. You know, everything's set on its own valve, so I just walk through, turn the pump on, water this one, go to the next one, do 2 beds at a time. Takes 5 minutes to do 2 beds.
Do you want to find a watermelon that has a trait of growing a thicker rind?
Man, so some of the wettest years I've had, you seem to grow thicker rinds. When you take Chris's like 302, I don't care if it's a wet year or a dry year, it always seems to have a thicker rind. There is some, when I first started growing traditional, you would only have a rind about this big. Now what I did find out is a couple years ago, I took a couple of melons and scooped all the flesh out, and with a rind around 2 inches, that equaled up 2/3 of your melon. So you really would want a thicker rind. You would want a solid melon, but it's not gonna happen, but you would want a thicker rind than I would. It holds more water weight.
Right.
And it's not, a lot of people used to tell me it was made more out of calcium, but I found some research papers that it was actually 70% made up out of phosphorus.
Okay, so having higher phosphorus and organic matter would be
Yeah.
the ticket.
So, when I was under 100, and which is very high in phosphorus, I never grew a melon over 250. When I went up to 276, that's what it was, I grew to 341.
Okay,
I went as high as 555, and that grew my other 341.
so 400 was okay for melon?
I'm not gonna tell you to do that, because phosphorus stays in your soil.
It's already there.
No, if you're there, you're there.
Okay,
But I still supplement and do a lot of phosphorus.
all right.
A lot.
Whether or not it's available.
Yeah, exactly.
You can have a phosphorus count of 1,000 and
Yep.
your plant can't utilize it, doesn't make any difference.
But that's where you can also use, mammoth P, just to help break down stuff that's unavailable.
That's
What is?
biological
Mammoth P,
too.
Mammoth P?
yeah,
Well, that is
Yep.
toxic.
yep.
Are there any particular biologicals that you are using besides compost tea?
And so, there's a stuff called microbial science, and I use that. There's another one, Johnson Sioux Compost, that, you know, Jake was talking about that. There's a company that sells it, and it's kinda expensive. It's like $40 and you get like 4 handfuls. But it only takes a handful to go a long way. But it has more biological diversity than any other compost you would get. Versus where like most of the ones you got maybe have 200 to 300 different types. This one has 350 to 400 different types. So you're adding a lot of other stuff into your soil where one's gonna eat one versus the other and then give back. I used to go get stuff out of the woods, which my woods is pretty much depleted, and the ones that know, when I first changed my soil, I dug up a spot probably 20, 30 feet wide, about 200 feet long, and took the top leaf mold off, then dug down the top 2 inches, just black soil, and put that all in my patch. And then that's when a lot of magic started happening for me. As far as any other, I use tags BE, which has a lot of different stuff in it. There was a new one I added, and it was a balloon, and then, but I can't remember what the name. It was in a gold and black bag. I can look that up and send it to you. But I don't remember what the name of it is. But it was the first year I ever used it. And worm castings, I use a lot of that for teas too. And Danny used to have a really good spot where you can go get 55 gallons for like $40. It's a huge container. Is it still the same? Was it $40 or $50?
It's gone.
Okay. And Cecil Weston, I don't know if any of y'all heard of him. If you do your soil test, he was a biggest help for me probably than anything, because my soil has stayed the same since 2019. I take my test, I send it to him. He makes my numbers the same. And when you can keep your numbers the same, you can feed the same and learn what to do different in a wet year and a dry year, because they're totally different. So a person should spend a couple of years doing nothing but tissue testing during a good dry year, because you're not leaching. And then a wet year and learning what you're actually losing, so you know what to put back in versus what's actually there and what's not. Yeah.
So if yours the same every year now, what do you think is the difference in your weights from one year to the next?
Weather, 100%. If you don't have weather, you ain't growing nothing.
Right.
So the 2 best years is 2 of the driest years I've ever had. And melon, I don't care, you could go pee on them and they will grow. I don't care what you do. And that's a joke, because we have a group chat and I say it all the time. What are you doing? Ain't no one listening.
You're right.
You know, but some years, well, every year weather matters more than what you do to it. If you ever notice in drier years, everybody has bigger fruits, bigger stuff, and that should tell you something. You're watering too much, you're doing too much. When it's a drier year, you can't overwater almost, because you're not having rain every week.
Right.
When you have rain every week and then you're out in the water and you're just shooting yourself in the face. Unless you got really good soil like Todd does, and it just drains, and the next day you can go till again, like and that never happened, you know. You can put on a lot more than what I could, because I'm probably, I guess if I'm 18% organic matter, the other part is clay, but I have a ton of clay, so I hold a lot.
Right.
You know, but my beds also vary, so some of them start out at 6 inches, and some of them are about 40 inches deep. It depends on, I go downhill, so you start off in the corner, by the time you get to the other side, you want it level.
Right.
So they get, so one side probably drains really well, and the other side has a lot of clay, which I also hold a lot more.
What,
nutrients than
in those beds, do you plant the root or the crown at the 40-inch end and grow to the clay end?
Nope. I plant in the, so I go in the center, cause like 10 feet is like my line, so I go in the center, 2 feet in, cause I know from there over is 10 feet. That's where I like to set on the main. So that's how I set that up. And then I'm 8 feet over to the side of my bed. That's where I really want to set it. So my beds are set up for how I grow. You can grow on the ground anywhere you want to, but people have a tendency to let their plant get way too big. So when you have an area that's limited, like you have to keep it.
Okay.
Smaller plants at the beginning is way better than you would ever think for a mill, especially with grafting. Traditional, I don't know. Traditional, the biggest I ever got was 233 pounds. So I don't know what I would do now if I would try. I might not even get that in.
Right.
Grafting has really helped me. And it really helps with disease. It says it's not supposed to actually increase your fruit size, but there is studies that say it does. Because the GWG at one time had a separate category because it said one will let it grow bigger, and then what, 2 years later, they took and put it all back together because it said it did. But when you read rootstocks, it says one of the side effects is some of them is larger fruit. I know Chris has tried it, and I'm going to try one. I don't know if y'all talk much about rootstocks. I know like Rampart and bushel gourds is probably your two. I will stay away from squash, even though I'm going to play with one this year. You got GL1, what you saw, I know Nick was using one. They're very, very aggressive. Did you ever use the GL1?
I use the.
Did yours blow up?
That's a board, yeah, they're more aggressive than either.
Yeah, so my first year when I did so horrible, that was the only one that blew up. Like, it got huge.
So stay away from that though, yeah?
I'm gonna try some this year. I got a couple beds that I've never got over, I think 270 was the biggest I got. So I'm gonna try a more aggressive one, maybe it can pull up more, maybe it'll do better. So in my regular beds, I'm gonna use Rampart. I think it's all in how you learn how to use something. So if you did bushel gourd every year, you would learn how to grow with bushel gourd.
Right.
I've always used Rampart, so I understand how to use a Rampart and how to grow it. They probably both are about the same. One grows a lot bigger fruit. I know some people say, oh, the growing is different, the days to maturity, but I still get just as much days growth as everybody else does. You know, whether it's 130 or if it's 90 or whatever you got, like I can still grow now for 130 days. If you can set early.
Right.
If you can't, it's just who can get the biggest fastest.
Talk about stump care and seed care.
Man, so when you start getting more of a, I guess, a bush around it, you know what I mean? I start trimming everything back about 2 feet all the way. I put a fan on there, maybe 2 fans. I got a little stump cover that goes over top of them. I will take peroxide and spray on it. Not that, like Aqua Silk is very strong. I will stay away from that. It will dry it out way too fast.
Just
And
3%?
Yeah, it's just regular. I literally go to the dollar store, get it, and go buy one of them cheap dollar sprays and take the container off and put the spray rod on it and use it just like that. Chris taught me about making sulfur and manganese. Mancozeb. And then I started putting just a pinch of Q-Pro in it. And you just make it kind of a water paste and paint on it. And that really helps, stops a lot of stuff and dries things out. And you can put it on your stem. And if you start getting a black spot, I've had it where it would almost stop it from going anymore, which thanks to the sign of gummy stem. And like my 272 I took, around day 50, it started getting that black spot and that melanin growing 117 days. I know it's bad that I know that, because it's like a children, because you watch it all the time, but
Is that
Are your children?
yeah.
sulfur mancozeb on for the stem?
So you just take a little bit and I don't know if Chris has a science to it, I just usually add maybe a tablespoon of the sulfur, just a little sprinkle of the mancozeb, and then I just a tiny little pinch of cupro. And I just mix it up until it's almost like a watercolor, like you wanna be able to see through it. And then I just take it and I put it in a can, put a paintbrush in it, and keep it in my patch.
Is that copper?
Cupro,
Cupro?
the bactericide, the fungicide, the bactericide, and something else. You can actually spray it on your coat.
Coside is copper.
Coside is it?
No.
No, Cupro.
Oh, Cupro.
Cupro is not copper.
Okay.
Yeah. If it is, I ain't read it.
You don't wanna mix mancozeb and copper.
Cupro? Oh, wow. Oh, yeah, I don't know that. I don't use copper. Now, Dwight told me about, Python this year, and I wanna try that, but spraying on my stuff, and it has copper in it, so you have to be very careful with that. I'm not a pumpkin grower, I try to be. Actually, the funny part is in 2014, Danny got me into this, and if y'all don't know the story, my wife was walking by and I was looking in awe at his pumpkin, and she goes, "Are you the pumpkin watcher?" And he goes, "No, I'm the grower." And now I'm still here. So, that's a cool story. Danny was out pimping pumpkins, as he called it.
I thought that was my gig. Pimping pumpkins.
Yeah, so it is definitely be good to have people. Every once in a while, I'll go up to the state fair and I'll talk for a couple hours and I go around, but it's a good place to get people involved. A lot of people go through. A lot of people have a lot of questions. More or less, can you eat it? And you can, but it ain't gonna taste good at that day.
Right. Like 90 and back, right?
Yeah, exactly, cause I picked them around 60, and they're like one of the sweetest watermelons you've ever eaten. And then I ate a melon in Kentucky, and it was the stringiest, nastiest thing I've ever eaten. Yes, and it's just because of the age. It wasn't because it probably wasn't really good at its time. Just when it's 120 days old, I'm staying away from now on. You know.
Your best watermelon is gonna be there.
A whirling melon anyway, that's your best
I
one.
mean, it's 7 or 8 acres on plant.
Yeah, exactly. Star Bright.
The drier years, people will comment, these are the sweetest I believe you've had.
Yeah, and you probably wouldn't, somebody told me something about the size of the stem, the thicker it is, the sweeter it is.
Well, if I can find a stem that's been bruised or beat, or, you know, where the watermelon rolls, actually it's a sweeter watermelon.
I wonder why that is. That's pretty interesting.
I think what it does is send sugars to fuel that stem, and
Man, if any of y'all have any problems with bugs, they came out with a new fungicide about 2 years ago that A.N.T, not fungicide, pesticide, A.N.T told me about, and it was called Venom. And Venom will kill cucumber beetles, squash bugs. It'll kill anything that pretty much touch your pants. It kills some aphids, some spider mites, whiteflies, a ton of stuff. And it's not super cheap, it's not very expensive. I think it's like $170 for a pound of it maybe, but a pound will probably last you 15 years because it's a quarter teaspoon per gallon that covers 1,000 square
Oh,
feet.
wow.
You can also get another one called A.N.T, which is super good for cucumber beetles, and it don't kill squash. And then Merit, of course, but Venom is awesome. If you ain't used it and you got a problem, bugs or any kind of thing, I would use that. That is super good.
Do you put pea gravel around the stump?
Some years I do, but it's, a lot of people do it and try to keep, I guess, dirt from splashing back. Makes your plant look nice and cute when it's young, but after it's covered up, you ain't getting nothing in there and you put a cover on it.
Right.
I think Chris started all that because he gets his out of Hattie Branch. Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
But after that, everybody's done it. So you can thank Chris for that.
Okay.
But he gets his out of a creek, so he might be getting a little extra something that people ain't getting.
Right.
Smoky Mountain River sand, yeah.
Yes. You know, but it probably keeps some weeds growing around it and stuff like that. It's probably more or less what it is. Because we cut our fabric and we cut back big enough to get in there and stuff.
Right.
And plant, so you will get weeds back around.
Do you have any grass in it?
So
The weed
every
barrier?
once in a while I will. 90% of what I grow, no.
Okay.
But now if you like, even on top, like if it gets under the pine straw and it, like, I don't know what you call that grass that starts growing crabgrass that just goes all over the place, it can get pretty bad in there. I've had some that get really bad.
Well, the reason I
Especially-
asked, I seen some people using preen, but I was afraid it would mess up the roots because you got so many fine roots.
I have no clue.
Okay.
I don't use none of that type of stuff.
Yeah,
I
that's
cover my
scary.
whole bed and then I put about 4 or 5 inches of pine straw. So I literally don't have
Okay.
any problem unless it's grown out of where you put landscape fabric in. Sometimes you'll get a piece of grass started up right there, but as long as you get it covered pretty good, you usually don't have a problem.
What do you do about the roots coming off the bottom?
Bottom, so they will still grow through and go through the fabric and root themselves in. So I've had some melons, like the 223.5 that I grew, not a big melon, but when that melon was probably 200 pounds, it was completely decapitated from the stump. It only had about 3 roots that come in. It grew for another 20 something pounds. Not much, but I ended up winning the farmer's market, beat Todd by half a pound. But, so, yes, so they can still grow in.
Right.
And then I have had them where they would go under the pine straw, and if it stays a moist enough year, they will make mats under the pine straw, and there's a separate layer in between.
Right.
As soon as there's enough give in it, they'll find a way to go right through it, and they'll root right in.
Does that not, like, do away with what you did with the rootstock?
Yep.
So, I mean, is it not all for nothing? I mean,
So-
is it mainly for just growing a bigger melon, or is it for
Give
that?
and take. So
Okay.
You can let them root in and get, Chris will probably tell you, so you're 280 something, when did it go out? Like, you said you lost it, it was only running on roots,
It was in August.
August, so what do you think the size was in pounds?
I put on about another 70 pounds.
After losing the stump. So,
Oh, wow.
I don't mind if I root down, it's just an extra boost.
Right.
I don't have much disease in my soil for that I know of yet, so I will let them do it. But it's supposed to help you get away from disease. So if you have disease, I would not suggest letting your stuff grow.
Okay.
I have tried a couple of years growing under Tyvek, which is a house wrap. It won't let water really much through it. It will keep water really good in your soil, but it will not let nothing through it. But I've had a good experience with it and a not so good. And I mean, that one was like 275, the other one was like 189 pounds. So I quit using it. I might try one more this year to see what it's like, because you have to really do it probably 4 or 5 years to get a good, oh, this is good. I don't really tell people that, because I would hate for people to go out there and do the whole patch in it and be like, well, I didn't grow nothing this fall, you know?
Right.
So is your water lines on top of the mill fabric or?
Most of the time, yeah. This year there will be. Last year I stuck them underneath it because I wanted to get away from overhead watering, but I ended up doing more overhead watering than I ever did because it was so dry at the beginning and stuff, and I ended up getting a lot of disease. So it will go through it. The type I use, you pretty much have to get it wet first to let water go through it. If not, most of it, if it's like a hard shower go through, a really slow rain, it just kind of rolls off the side. Until probably 2 or 3 months pass and it's kind of broken down a little bit and water can get through it. But I just use a regular fabric, and it's really hard to get water to go through.
What's your soil temperature when the melon is put on the weight?
So
Ballpark.
you're probably looking at about 76 to 78. I never get much higher than that. My soil is probably one of the coolest to start off, because me and Todd did a little thing. He's always about 5 degrees warmer than me.
You
Even
have a
at
lot
this
of afternoon shade.
so so about 4 o'clock to 5, I get my afternoon shade. Todd gets afternoon shade too, but he's sand
Yeah.
too, so he heats up a lot faster. While his melons at the end kind of slow down, and you might see that because you're growing sand. You might have a really fast 60 days, and then the last 40 is like, man, I'm not really doing nothing. And that could be because your soil temp, you don't want to throw all your organic matter, you done leached 50% of what you had, and you're just not feeding enough to maintain that plant. But one way you will know is if you did a tissue test, and you would see kind of what's coming in and what's going out.
What's the temperatures that you pollinate at?
Air temp or soil temp? Because I
Air.
haven't really done the soil. I'm gonna guess the soil's a little bit cooler than that time. Air temp, I'd rather be that 85, that maybe even up to about 90. When you start getting up more above that, you can have some really misshaped fruits.
So, because in West Virginia, we don't get there till later in the afternoon, and then sometimes the blossoms are like, yeah, well, we're done. We done opened up. We're done.
I'd much rather go in cooler than I would warmer.
Okay.
Warmer now, I'll say warmer, sometimes they take off and they grow a little bit faster, but I'd much rather go cooler and have a better shaped melon than have everything set pear. And Chris has been through that where you're doing late pollination, and every time you do it, it's a pear shape, pear shape, pear shape.
You talking about like blossom ends small and the stem ends like real big? Is that what you mean, pear shape?
That's the
Yeah,
one
I
you
get that.
don't want.
I get that all the time, like
Now,
every
the
stinking
opposite
one.
Side, and you got a smaller stem and a bigger bottom, they can almost grow out of that until you start seeing some kind of a crease in it. If you see where it starts to crease in it, it's never gonna grow out of it.
Okay.
But if you just see just a little bit, it kind of looks like a tear shape.
Yeah.
That's fine. Most
Okay.
of the time, every one I've ever had like that actually grew out. And actually, the first year I did good, I had one like that and sent it to Chris. He's like, "Oh, that's what you want,"
Oh,
and
okay.
it ended up being a really good thing. Yeah.
All right.
And like lobe size, you know, some people like, oh, I want this or that. My biggest melon was growing off a 3 lobe, so I will never shy away from that. I always tell everybody I want to grow a single lobe, just one, because there's no way there could be a hollow spot there.
Right. Well,
You know, but you never get those.
I was going to ask you, when you cut one open, is that like when you see those sections? Those are that's the lobes in there, right?
Yeah, so you see it'll look almost like a heart.
Right.
It'll go just like that, yeah.
Okay.
And 5s usually go heavier the chart than 4 and 3, whatever. It seems like there is a coincide with that, more lobes, the more heavier the chart. But they also don't seem to get as long, the more fatter. But you can get just as fat on a 3 lobe as you can a 4 lobe as a 5 lobe, you know. Actually, the biggest, fattest around I grew was a 4. You saw that, that was my 329. It
Yep.
was 61 and a half inches outside, which is
That's a
very big.
big, yeah.
That's the only one I ever known to be over 60, so. Yeah.
Do you change your care from like day 75 or day 80, trying to get to the
Depends on
finish
if I'm
line?
mad at it or not. If it's growing
Or do you
right.
mash the
hey,
gas?
Hey, if I'm growing right, it's gonna eat every day. But it ain't getting, it's gonna miss a few. It just all depends. So
Everything that's left, here you go.
if you got a melon, you're growing on scale, and it's doing 0.2, and I know, and next week I'm picking it, it may get this spray today, but it's not my priority. So if you have 5 on scale and they have a chance of being over 300, they are getting my best care at that point in time of the season. Your smaller ones always go behind. They still get fed like the other ones, but they don't get the care. Like, I'm not looking over them getting closed out. Diseases, pruning at that time. They would end up being a tag along depending on what type of the year, you know, if you gotta double up and take 2 melons away off.
My biggest takeaway is what you said, 10 to 12 days, if it's not growing 5 pounds a day, cut it off.
And that was the biggest thing I learned from Mr. Kent. Yeah.
The only exception I'll say to that was last year, where it was cold.
Oh, yeah,
That's the exception. If it's cold, they will not grow very good. And it was cold, and you can look at all of mine and even though that they were different ages, they all took off at the same day when it warmed up. So that's under a normal circumstances. But now, if you've only got days where it's in the 40s or 50s at night, those things are not gonna take off and grow like they're supposed to. So just because it's day 14 and that thing's supposed to be doing 5.5 pounds, it's not gonna do it if you're in the 40s or 50s at night and only 65 degrees during the day.
So it's a qualified
Right.
response, but
Right. But now
I think that's great information though, I've never
And the
heard.
thing about last year too is some of the melons, like some of the mine don't have scales, so like you measure by circumference, and when they would normally be doing 1 inch a day at that time, some of them were still doing 2 inches a day, which is really big for its day and age, but everything started off a lot slower. I don't know if that had something to do with it or not, you know. Like me, Jake, and Todd went on this whole premise last year of the whole, don't give it no big shots of potassium before day 14. It was more calcium, boron, magnesium, and something else. Maybe y'all did mobilum or some weird name. But every one of our fruits went heavy except for one. My heaviest one was 11%, Todd's was 15%, which is a lot really for a melon. But it's really a lot when you look at how I grow melons on average, and when, like, I don't never get really 3 or 4 or 5% heavy at all, but then everybody grew heavy by staying in
Away
that
from
one
potassium.
idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there was actually stuff written about it that, you know, if you use big shots of potassium, before you come out of cell division, it can knock you out of it. And so with the melon, that's probably a big deal. I don't know about pumpkins, you know, they may continue to grow cells and grow flesh on the inside and can do that. I don't know. But there's no big shots during that time. Stay out of it. And Robert knows, I like to feed, don't I?
Oh, yeah.
I like to eat too. We all the same. Oh, you know, cause you get the pictures. Yeah, a lot of chicken. But, anybody else got any other questions maybe? Maybe starting off, grafting, fruit set?
So you put a little bit of pea gravel around your crowns, correct?
I have a couple times, but I don't do it every time. Some people do it to try to keep their dirt and splash them back on their stumps and
You
stuff.
still do it, Chris?
If you wanna make it look pretty, that's okay. If you don't, I understand it. Now, does it do something? I don't know.
So
Maybe
with
it helps it keep it cooler.
Yeah, so with your fabric, obviously you put your pine straw on top of that, correct? And that helps probably with temperature, is that correct?
Oh, it does, like, I think that's what keeps my soil from ever getting, I've never checked my outside soil, so I couldn't even tell you what it is. But if you can walk on it, it's burning your feet, it's a lot hotter than 80 degrees. I was gonna say something, but it doesn't let my own mind,
So we don't have access to pine straw. Just using regular straw, I did that last year, and probably hold more moisture.
I don't know about that. I know some of the greenhouse growers do it. I always thought it would rot, so I don't know if you had any problem with any of it rotting, but I would not want my vine to touch something that's potentially gonna rot.
I used it one year, I thought it was a great idea, I used it one year and all my vines started rotting because every morning that was holding moisture and wet and the vines started rotting, so.
So you use a pine straw?
I use pine straw, yeah, I will not use wheat straw.
So when do you start your rampart and your, seeds?
My rampart has always started March 4th. And I
Okay.
wait for them to pop the soil, and after they pop, I used to wait till the cotyledons lay down, but I started doing mine a little earlier, because I started taking mine back out to the greenhouse and things grow a little faster out there. And they do with artificial light, so I'm having to start a little bit earlier with my melon seeds now. I'm a little bit, I guess, behind this year, but I used to have a little bit two bigger plants, but all my beds now have soil cables in them, so I don't have to worry about cold soil and getting a slower start, because I usually had to start earlier to be able to compete with, like Todd and everybody else in our state would pollinate at the right time, because I would literally probably be 2 weeks behind and getting my plant big enough, just because 5 degrees in your soil is a big difference in trying to make something grow. Now if I wanna put it 100 degrees, I can do it and it'll be there in a week's time. But I don't do that, you know. I usually jack mine up to 90 to get everything going good, and then I turn it back down.
And you plant outside the third week of April?
All depending on weather. I would say my last frost has been May the 10th, and I had to go get extra plants from Chris and Todd. But yes, most of the time I'm there at that time. Third week of April, I usually have little hoop houses over, everything, heat lamps, whatever I have to have, you know, to keep going. I'm all or nothing. Last year, if you planted later, you was way better off than everybody that started early. I want to grow a melon for 130 days, and if you want to do that, you have to be pollinated by the first week of June. If not, you're going to be towards the end of June, sometimes July, but in a really warm season, it don't matter. You can plant the 1st of May and pollinate the first week of June, but we don't always have that.
Andrew, do you have a benchmark to hit a 200-pound melon? What day do you want to see it?
42,
42.
yeah, that's been my best one. Most people, and Chris can tell you, day 50 is on pace for 300. Day 50, you can be 200 and still only hit 250 if you blow up. But really, my best melons, the quickest I ever got there was 36 days. I was 206 pounds, and that catastrophically blew up. You don't want that. I want it if it would hold together. And Chris will tell you, I ain't growing for 350 no more. He's growing for 400. He ain't worried about it. He wants to grow that big one, because sooner or later you'll find one that's going to stick. But 42 was pretty much my two biggest ones, was 200 pounds that day.
I look at, if by day 50 to be at 200, because a good melon will gain another 100 pounds from day 50 till whenever you pick it.
Yeah.
If you go, 110, 120 days.
So like day 20, I wanna be around 125 inches. And then day 50, you wanna be about 200. And then from there, I guess the fastest I ever got was like 67 days to 300 pounds. And that ended up being a 341 and a half, and that was peaked at day 89. So, you want one that's gonna grow, but you don't want it to grow too fast. I know that sounds bad, cause a pumpkin, you probably want everything you can get every day, but you really need to tone it down if you're hitting big numbers, cause you will lose it.
Yep.
You know, about that one that was 206 pounds at day 36, it lost its stump too, and it was rooted in a couple, and it ended up being my 238. Like, that's all it would grow after that pack. As soon as it blew, it went 11.2 to like 2 pounds to 0.2 pounds in like 2 days.
So you're saying when they blow, you're talking more along the lines of the stump?
Yeah, but that's a real bug, 'cause that blew out from the gourd. Most people say you have stump failure and it's gourd because of the gourd, but it's never the gourd that really blows up. All the side that always blows up is your melon side. And you can blow up a traditional just as easy as you can a grafted if you're pushing too much on it, you know. So it's something in the melon side, it's not just the gourd side. Something in the melon side, it can't handle it. And we're trying to force it to, it just won't take it. Like, I've been over to Todd's and he's growing a traditional and it's big as around as a coffee can, and you're like, how does that even happen? Because it's all natural, but it still can't handle it. It cannot handle more than probably 7 pounds. If you're hitting 8 pounds, Todd's 269 hit 8 pounds for like 3 days.
You think it's the stem size? Not being able to get enough of the water into
Well,
it?
you look at a pumpkin, so like my like 929, it didn't have a stem over like that, and my melon stems are like that. You know, it would do 50 pounds a day, and I'm over here doing 5 pounds a day, and it still blew up. You know, so something, either something shuts off and it's still trying to push water, or something just can't handle it. It just can't. So, now if you find one that does,
It's getting restriction, like maybe the skin, the rind can't stretch fast enough or
and
something.
what's really weird is, this is something Chris taught me too, is you can go out there, even if you have a scale, you can tell when your melon's grow. When it's not, you can grab it and your vine will be warm just like bath water. When it's growing, it'll be 50 degrees, it'll be cold.
Right.
You will literally feel the water going through it. And that's a really interesting thing.
That's cool.
You found anything with shading of the plants?
I think that 100% helps me to get it. I don't think you have to have sunlight from daylight to dark. I get
never pay attention.
I get sun around 8:30 to 9, and I'm out of full sun by 5. I don't never get full sun again after that. It's in between the trees, you know, I cut those holes and where I can get a little filtered light through it. It looks like it's sunny, but it's not full. You know, I can only cut so many of my neighbors' branches down before it finds out.
Yeah, when he's on vacation.
Last year I cut a tree down and they got hung up.
It
Yeah, last year I cut a tree down, and it got hung up, and it finally blew down. I'm like, oh man, he's gonna catch this. He's gonna catch this. Cause I cut it up about 10 foot up in the air, you know, just to cut it off. Cause we had the pool going and the kid was in there like, we want more daylight. So I'm up there with this pole saw and I'm just making no noise. And it finally goes and just hangs up and sits there. I'm like, oh shit. But he never caught it, but I don't think he would mind, but.
But you're not doing any fabric, artificial shade?
No. So Todd last year did hell netting, and his biggest ones were growing under hell netting. And that's because the year before that, me and him got ate up with tail, and it was his fault. He called me at 2 o'clock in the morning, goes, it's coming my way now. I'm like, what are you talking about? And he sends me a video of his hail, and I look, starts at my house and goes to his house, and it ruined all our butt plants. But
Did you go out at 2 in the morning to?
I was on vacation down at the beach, and
Oh.
he's sending me a video, like, look what you just got. Sweet Todd.
With kisses.
Yeah. I still ended up growing 306 pounds off a tertiary vine, which
Yeah.
is really cool.
How far out?
About 7 feet.
7 feet.
That was off the finger vine.
A lot.
You're not using shade?
No, I would love to have like hail netting just because of that one storm. I've been hit twice with hail since I've been doing this since 2015. That's not, I guess it's just a part of the game. I mean, you're going to get it or you're not. You ain't going to win every year. You ain't going to lose every year, so just take what you get. Because you're going to learn something different. Like I learned you can set on another vine rather than my 4 favorite. So it's just a learning curve.
What's the longest you ever ran 2 melons on a plant and still got a
So-
good outcome?
Well, I wouldn't say it was good, except for one was on a rack, well, two of them was on a rack. One of them got a hole in it, and it was 247 pounds. The other one, Chris come over and told me, that's gonna be the heaviest melon in your patch. I'm like, bullshit, it sounds hollow. It take 239, weigh 268.8. So I had two of them on the plant. One was 16 feet out, one was about 8 feet out.
Yeah, 8 foot was 269.
16 foot on the melon. That was a 6-lobe melon, which was really odd, so I ended up keeping it. I didn't plan on growing two. One, I'm like, oh, look at this is cool. And it didn't actually have a 6-lobe. What it did is it put a row of seeds right down the middle of the melon. So instead of having a lobe, it just found some place to shove a row of seeds, and that's where it was. Yeah. Really odd. That was and that one never went GPC because that was my smallest melon in 2019. That's why I had all my big ones and it went to the
Right.
county fair.
Have you grown that now, though?
No, that was Chris's 327, so that would have been the second self of it. And then I'm like, man, selfs really suck. Because, like, if you look at them, selfs really don't grow. There's a few that grow and grow really well. But then there's a bunch of sibs that do very well. So I started sibbing more stuff and I got away from it. You even look at Chris's, like all his sibs do really well. Some of his selves, I don't think, maybe they ain't been growing them. I just don't think they perform. Even myself, I don't grow them. And I don't want them, and even, you look at even the pumpkin aspect, you take Wood, Andy's, he had that 23 and something, he had 3 different ones, 2 selves in the self, 2 sibs in the self. Both sibs did really well and the self was the last one on the list. So that's kind of a good example. Now, does that really mean anything? I don't know. I can't talk to them. I try.
Anecdotal.
They don't listen. You know. Any other questions?
Finger vine. A lot of talk on watermelon groups about the finger vine. What all, like, a lot of people say that's where they want to put the watermelon at. Why not on the main? Why the finger?
It's all preference. So, like, I drew a chart and you can go see, like, all of my best melons were grown on a finger vine. You don't always get it. So, when you do a finger, so I keep 4, 2 on each side, and then you have one main. You may get a fruit at 6 feet, and then the next one might be 17 feet out. You don't
wow.
know. So you got 4 chances over here, way more better odds.
Right.
I would say the 330 I was growing that year, caught the 341, passed it, and was growing better. So I'd much rather have a main vine because I've seen more potential in it, but I'm not going to stray away. But I also would say most of the time when a stump blows, your main vine is the most one that's effective. Some of my bigger ones, like my 329, you can stick your hand down the middle of the stump, and there was one vine that really still had enough fluid going through it, and that ended up being the side of my 329. So they kept going. Now I have had them when you blow them up and you're just done.
Right.
It's just lucky or you're not. Growing melons is probably 90% luck, 5% skill, and I don't know if 5% whatever. You just gotta be lucky.
Any comment on a seed that's been grafted 5 to 7 times versus the first time grafted?
That's interesting. So, not a lot of people talk about that. So, we usually find more traditional seeds that's been grown their first time on grass or more aggressive. Like you take 255s and older seeds and put them, they're very aggressive. Like they grow and grow well. You take a seed that's been grown, grafted for 2 or 3 years, it's almost like the plant gets accustomed and tones itself down. Is that true? I don't know, but that's kind of the thought that some of us has had to talk about.
Todd and me talked about that too.
243, 2009. Yeah, right now.
Got any questions, Big Daddy? Come on, man, you're my pumpkin.
I think that's right, 230, 2009, I know that for a fact.
You got any? No, you gonna grab some.
He's been feeding me to
Oh, okay. Man, and if anybody wants to come see my patch, sometimes it's easier. So the second year I grew, I went to Chris's patch, Todd's patch, HC's, and just kind of see how they grew. And it really gives you a good idea, okay, hey, this is how it's actually done, because when you just have it in your mind, and you see pictures, you're like, man, this is a really elaborate setup, and then you go back on, oh, they're just as redneck as I am. Whatever we can put together, it waters, it works. Nothing special, it's a lot of work. And when people ask me, most of y'all probably know, like, I might spend 50, maybe sometimes 60 or 70 hours a week in your patch, depending on what you got.
Job number one.
Yes, after my real job. Yeah, so after that, but yeah. So it's really what you're willing to put in is what you're really to get out. There's some people that get really lucky, and then there's some people that actually put in a lot of work, and that's why they're very consistent at what they're doing. Most of growing melons is going to be, just get your soil good, set within a certain amount of distance. Do not try to say, oh, I need a 200 square foot plant to set. That's a myth. Just completely stay away from that. And just try to stay planted, you know. Be proactive. Don't try to go after the fact. Keep your bugs away.
Stay ahead of the plan.
Yeah.
One thing I found interesting that some of the new
Right.
growers, it might have gone over their
Ounce
head.
of prevention.
Um,
An ounce of
You
prevention.
made a comment, you have 18% organic matter. Can you highlight the difference in your growth between when you first started and your organic matter wasn't there, and how you got the process of bringing your organic matter up, and the changes that's made?
So I changed all mine in one season, and I changed it all in about a 4-month period. And that's when I went and dug all the woods out, and then I had probably 14 yards of mushroom compost, and then I had about another 10 yards of leaf compost come out. And I was just lucky because I had read about North Carolina red clay, that ideal ratio for it. Red clay was 15 to 19%. And when I had all my mixed together, it come out at 18, I'm like, oh man, I hit it right on. And all my numbers were up, but they wasn't where I wanted it, so I added some things. Cecil's very against high phosphorus. I'm the opposite, because I've seen some of the bigger growers and where their numbers were, so I went and did what I wanted to do and added it, and then I sent him and said, hey, can you balance this out? And I got a good stern talking to. I give it every year, but I always tell them, look, I came down 10 points.
Yeah, and it's, sometimes it's naturally in the soil, and you just,
Yeah.
it is what it is.
But, from growing in almost straight clay, my plants wouldn't perform. They would grow so bad. It was the worst season I ever had. And I went from the worst season to the best season. It was all because I spent literally a whole year or 4 months. I would come home, grab my shovel, grab my wheelbarrow, run down to the woods. If I could get 3 or 4 good wheelbarrows of good dirt that day, that's all I could get. And then I would go wait to the next day, wait to the next day. And I just did that all summer until I got my soil to where it felt good, loose. I put probably 8 bags of perlite in each one, 3 or 4 bales of peat moss, just whatever I could to actually make it loose. And perlite's good for your soil because it actually helps hold stuff too.
Yeah.
That's what I did for like pretty much 4 months, 5 months, until I got it where I wanted to. Anybody's ever been in my patch, ever seen, everything was dug out and moved by hand, so that's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work.
Anybody who wants to come see it though, you're more than welcome. I've had people come over and ask, can they go in my shed with a notebook and close the door and write down everything. And you can do that too, but it ain't gonna make you a better grower, it's just the same fertilizers, you know. But, more than welcome to do that. And if anybody ever wants to come over just to chit and talk, or if they want my number, you can do that too. I talk to hundreds of people about growing, and I don't mind it, you know. Heather don't mind it either, because she likes company. You know? It's not too much about melons. Gotta bring a net. We talk something more realistic than hearing the same conversation. Because there's like, how can they be together for 3 days and still talk about a stupid watermelon? I hear it every time we go to Knoxville.
You got a good one.
Yeah, she's all right. Don't tell her I said.
I don't wanna spoil your reputation.
Yeah, I know. Anything else?
Well, I can say one thing from knowing him. He's told you a lot of things about how to grow and what he does to grow these. But what I take away from what I see, why he's so successful, is he networks with all kinds of people. He networks with everybody. And he's like a sponge. He just absorbs that information, but but then he goes and applies it. And he will not spare any length to go to do what he's wanting to do. Those three things, network with as many people as you can. Take that information and then apply it to your patch, and he just works his tail off, you know, those things that made him successful. When other growers that I've seen that are successful, doing those things, you're gonna have results.
Man, I tell you, my biggest problem in growing, I'm gonna change this year, is when you, especially with pumpkins, I always get a disease. And I'm always like, nah, it's gonna cure itself up. I ain't gonna ask nobody, cause I already got it. Which if I probably would've asked 3 weeks beforehand, I might've could've been more preventative. So if you think you have an issue, don't wait. Just go ahead and send a picture to somebody, they will find something to maybe try to help you out. Cause I've spent a lot of time and money trying to grow a pumpkin, and you just end up rolling it up and throwing it in. Which when you ask somebody, it's like, oh, that's not that, that's this. It could have been treated, and then you're like, well, I should have asked. You know? So asking questions is more better than not doing nothing. Because you only get one chance every year to grow. That's it. And most of us might get 40 years. We may only get 20 years to grow. You don't never know. So you only get 20 shots. That's why I grow as much as I do every year, because I gotta get as many as I can in.
Did you do anything last year that you really liked and felt like it was something I want to do this going forward?
So the whole thing about cell division and staying away from adding any extra potassium, I'm 100% gonna do that every year. I want to try it a couple more years to see, does it really, like, do I stay heavy every time? Does it make more or no? But you want to get as many cells, so as many cells as I can get into it, I will. You know? The only thing I hope we don't have is another warm start, then another cold spell in between it. That ruined, like, I should have been pollinating mid-May, and it was mid-June. You know, plants were so good, so bad, but they never recovered from it. They just never did. I had, what I had, 20 plants last year, but I went all out on that. I mean, I really went all out. And I ended up with like 6 plants in the end, because they just, it would be day 10, day 20, and you're looking at a melon that has an OTT of anywhere between 7 and 18 inches, and you're like, what the hell are you doing here? So you pull it, you just cut your loss and you go home, you know? But, yeah.
What changes you gonna make next year?
I'm gonna add a second water line, more or less have an A&D, so I can do an even water without having to go so much overhead. That's pretty much it. I don't change what I do much. I literally don't. Like, I'm very subtle. I'm where I think I need to be. I've grown melons big enough to be world records without the weight. I'm just trying to get the weight in there. I may never get that chance again, but I feel like what I've done has worked, so I really don't want to vary away. I'm not doing big changes. Like, the biggest change I did was try and tie that under a couple beds, and adding heating cables to where I can get that early start is really it. I mean, early. If I could find a miracle fertilizer, I would. You know, I would love to try Florel because it's supposed to help with cell division, but then again, I've heard very bad ideas with melons. But Exotic does the same thing. It just helps you with cell division.
You watering with, city water or private well?
Private well. Private well.
You monitor your pH of the solution you put on?
Last year was the first year I ever done it, and I didn't have such a great year, but I don't know if it's that. So the only thing I actually tried to monitor, so my natural water is like 6.4. You know, so it's not bad, but when you add stuff, it goes up and down, up and down. So foliarly, I really tried to, because I know the more acidic you're supposed to be, the more it could go into your plant a lot faster. So I would try to get it down to that, I don't know, 6.2, not something really crazy, just down a little bit more than 6.8. I can't tell no difference in last year because it was not like a stellar year. It was. But now, did I do okay? Yes. I mean, did it help? I can't tell you because I didn't even take a tissue test. I was so aggravated last year. But I also tried PPFN, which is also supposed to help with nutrient uptake, and I didn't do a test for that. So, there was a lot of new stuff I did try, but I can't tell you if it helped it. Any other questions? Stomach starting to growl. I don't miss that comment. No, I'm fine, yes, whatever. You think I missed anything? Anything you wanna add? Maybe I should talk about?
Where do you get the excited from?
I ordered it online. I just typed up Excita and it'll come, it's like XYCTO, I think that's how you spell it. X-Y-TCO, but you shouldn't order none, cause I got enough to last a lifetime and a half. So if you wanna try it, I'm more or less, let you try some. And that's like fungicides, if any of y'all wanna try any fungicides, and it's more expensive, like getting together as a group and doing it, it's a lot cheaper, because a little bit goes a long way. And I bought some of them, and we spent $8, $9, $10, $11, $1,200 on them, and then they sit there and go bad, it's not worth it. So if anybody needs something, I got it, you're more than welcome to some. Because it's rather be used than be wasted. Robert, I saw your hand up.
I'm sure Andrew didn't miss that.
Smell the cart. Anything? Am I done? Can I smell that?
Thank you, Andrew.
Yes.